Representative Harris, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, very good. Hey, I love that flag back there. Look at that.
The
It's
48 star from a fort. It's got bullet holes in it.
oh wow, bullet holes from when?
I don't know what fort it came from. I bought it in Joseph, Oregon at an antique store, and she was telling me about it, but she couldn't remember what fort it came from.
Oh, well, that would be a great mystery to kind of find the provenance on that flag there. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Wow. Well, thanks for joining us. We were just noticing that the House says it won't convene again until Friday, but you guys have come back for some late sessions. Is there going to be a later session today?
Not that I'm aware of. I think Friday might roll dual sessions, but today I think we're finished for the day.
Okay, great. And you guys only got to get through one bill today. We were expecting a bunch. There was a lot of good ones on the docket today. I didn't expect that debate to go too long, especially considering how many people ended up voting for it.
Yeah, there was a lot of misconceptions around that bill, which is why I think the debate went as far as it did. That's what compelled me to stand up and finally say enough. So it was a good debate today, and it was a very good piece of legislation. I'm glad it got through because it's going to help people across the state.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many times we've seen folks talk about how, we need more money from the state to fund daycares and to open up preschools and to get into pre-K. The state really only has a mandate to be through K through 12, but they seemingly want to get into the pre-K world. Yeah. And of course, Democrats want if they do want kids in the world, if they do let them out of the womb, they seem to want them in state-run education their entire life anyway. Yeah. So, all right, very good. Well, I wanted to bring you on here because this is your first term. You're a freshman, so we're about a month and a half, or we're about 2 months into the session here. And as we've been following the legislature, we see a lot. We just did it earlier with the chicken ownership bill. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of nuances that I'm just curious to know if before you got into where your role now. Is it more complicated than you thought? Is it a breeze? Because you're somebody who's you are very meticulous in committee. You'll find the most perfect question that deals with a line that could have huge ramifications that everybody else missed. So, is this just your nature, or are you finding yourself kind of like in the zone right now?
Honestly, that's a great question. I didn't come down here thinking that I would be. Well, I guess let me rephrase that. I didn't think I would enjoy reading legislation as much as I do. I'm a pretty OCD guy inherently because of what I do for a living as an electrician. But diving into these bills, I have a tendency to follow the language, and then they'll give a code reference specifically. So I have to go look at that code reference. This is part of the way I think. If you're giving me some, and I think that a lot of that might have to do with my electrical background and reading electrical code, because you'll read a section of code and it forces you to go to another section of code, which forces you to go to another section of code before you can actually get the answer you need. And having that ability to understand that process just from my industry and what I do, I think helps me really pinpoint some of those fine details just by following the rabbit trail. And yeah. It's easy to get overlooked. There's a lot of legislation that comes through. I still read every single bill, believe it or not.
Wow. And you're on three committees. You're on three committees, my friend. So let's see.
And every bill from every other committee.
Yeah. So the business committee, the education committee, and transportation?
Correct.
Yeah. And so does this give you a lot of time to run your own legislation? Is there anything that you have in your drawers?
There's a balance there. I didn't come down here expecting to do a whole lot my first year. Maybe the second year sessions were when I was a little more comfortable and had a little more of the relationships built with some other people that I could trust, so I could maybe ease back a little bit on the detailed reading and rely on some other people that I know read legislation as well as I do. But no, I've still found time. I've got probably 4 bills sitting in my desk right now. I've got one that I have a hearing on Monday in business. And then there's a couple other ones I got coming out of the lineup. One of them is going to be a pretty interesting bill. I'm excited to see how it goes. But
oh, great. Which committee should we look in for that one?
I would imagine it's going to be a state affairs bill. I don't mind sharing with you guys what it is because it's a fantastic bill. But
I'd love to hear it. Yeah, if you want to share it here, I'd love to hear it. And the state affairs is everyone's favorite committee because that's where all the action is. So
you guys are getting it first, and it's going to make some waves. But essentially, this Monday, I learned that there's no drug testing policy for teachers, no requirements, and so I'm
for any of them,
none.
Not just substitutes, but for any of them.
Only under suspicion.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, these people are dealing with our kids and they're dealing with potential emergency situations. And so I just drafted legislation that says we're going to start drug testing teachers.
Wow, that's incredible. And you know what? You've got a good point. I mean, these are people that are with our kids,
Yeah.
8 to 10 hours a day, depending on extracurricular activities and such. And that's a great. I mean, look, when you have to go through background checks and all sorts of things like that at the beginning of the year, but we don't really know what's going on throughout the year, and there has been a lot of instances where we've.
Sure.
That potential for that is there. Wow, yeah. So I suspect that's going to make waves. I do remember a bill a couple of years ago that dealt with doing that with substitute teachers, and that caused a huge uproar. I don't think it went anywhere, but this will be a good shot across the bow for you. That's great.
I mean, at the end of the day, how do you vote no? I mean, we're talking about our kids, right? We're talking about protecting our children.
Oh, you're in for a wake-up call. How do you vote no? They'll tell you how they vote.
Yeah. But there's industry across the nation that we require pre-employment drug tests for. And most of them have to deal with some sort of safety aspect, right?
Yes.
And there are safety aspects within teaching. If there is an emergency situation and you might not be clear-headed because you took a pill or smoked a joint or whatever you did on your free time, that's going to play into effect of the safety of that child and how you're going to respond.
Yeah.
But then you have just the daily safety aspects. If you're not at your sharpest while you're in the classroom, are you catching some things that maybe you'd be missing if you were sober?
Right.
So I think it's just a common sense thing. It's not a big deal. I'm assuming I'm going to get a lot of pushback, but it's just common sense to me.
Yeah, and if you take it to its logical conclusion there, if something were to happen, who is on the hook for it? It's the state, right? Because these people are employees of the state or the school or the county. So it really there may be criminal charges laid upon them, but they could also put the district at risk or the state at risk. And I hear that argument all the time when they're pushing back on other legislation that may criminalize what happens. And
it already happens, right? When you have a teacher, for example, in Lewiston at the Tammany High School, you had teachers got charged with sexual battery with a student. And who's going to pay that bill? Taxpayers are going to pay that bill because it's the insurance company from the state that's going to pay that, and they're going to want to seek retribution for their payment, and we're going to end up footing the bill for that charge.
Right. Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, we'll definitely be watching on you say Monday you'll have that hearing, you think?
No, Monday is a different bill. This one I haven't introduced yet. I got to do a little bit of tweaking to it. It's in its draft stage right now, but
gotcha. Okay.
I might hold it until next year just because I want to make sure it gets through, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, and you got a lot on your plate with 3 committees and being very meticulous with your bills. That's good. So outside of your own legislation, what is something this year that really caught your attention that you really wanted to get behind, and that you think is really going to be a really, really good for the state of Idaho if it passes?
There's a couple really good bills out there. I really liked House 93. I think it still has some flaws. But we all campaigned, and the state's been asking, the citizens been asking for a parental choice bill forever. And so while this one might not be exactly perfect, it is a great foundation to build off of, and it's moving us in the direction that we needed to go. And then we can just legislatively come back and make some tweaks as it starts to become implemented. I think that with that bill, there's a lot of misconception out there as well. It's not taking money away from public education. It's not doing all these things that that side of the argument is saying it's doing. I also really like a bill that came through today in House Education that codifies graduation requirements into statute and takes it out of the rule process. Obviously, there's some people against that, but it's a great thing. We already, they had all the input, they made the rules, and we just took their rules. We made a couple minor adjustments, and now we're going to codify them into law. It's the same thing we did with the electrical rules last year. They went and just, instead of having to fight the rule process every year, they said, we're just going to codify this into law. You run your rules for the amendments and we're good. And so this still lets them come to the table with rules, and they can still make suggestions for graduation requirements. But if they want to change any of the requirements, it has to come through the legislator. And really the thought process is, while I'll give them credit for going out there and having their meetings and bringing in teachers and professionals to kind of build those requirements, which is the process they use now, arguably at the end of the day, each one of us is representing 50 plus thousand people, and we're at the call of 50 plus thousand people. So if you want to have true input and what your graduation requirements are going to be, you would think your parents would want to be involved in that. And right now it's hard for them to get into that process. And so by putting it into statute, they can write us letters, they can send us emails, they can give us phone calls, they can talk to the school districts, they can talk to the superintendent, and then they can come to us as legislators and say, hey, this is what we're hearing across the state. This is a piece of legislation we'd like to run to pass it, and then we fix it. But this way, it gives more oversight. It gives more control to the legislative body, who at the end of the day is responsible for talking to all of their constituents versus a handful of teachers and professionals.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Very good. Well, man, we're glad you're there. One final tip for everybody out there, if you would, what is, when you are looking through these bills and you're, like I said, you're very meticulous looking through it, is there any tips that you can give to somebody on what to look out for? Like certain language that you're like, wait a minute, I don't know, when they sneak stuff by you?
The first thing to look for, honestly, is at the very start of the bill. And it's not necessarily always just there, but it'll go through and it'll say, addresses section blah 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 blah, subsection blah 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 blah, and amends, or it'll say and amends, and it'll say new chapter. And when it says new chapter, you'll start reading it and you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it said in the previous chapter. Because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take a chapter and say, we don't want it in this department anymore, we're going to move it to this department under this section of code, so they're going to create a new chapter. And so you start reading and you're like, oh yeah, this is all they did was just copy and paste. No, they sneak stuff into that.
Wow. Without having to underline it or anything?
They know, because it's a new chapter. It's all new. They don't have to underline anything. Right. And so that's how they sneak it in. And so what I generally do is I will print the original piece of legislation and I will take the new bill and I will go side by side and I'll just start reading line by line with a highlighter and highlighting what was struck, what was added. And then you're like, wait a second. Hold on.
I love it. Very good. That is a great tip. Great tip.
So anytime you see new chapter, they are not required to underline any verbiage in that new chapter.
Right.
Whether or not it looks the same, part of it probably is the same, but I guarantee you there's something different in it.
Yeah. Very good. Awesome. All right. Well, Representative Harris, thanks so much for showing up today, taking the time. Where can people follow you? How can people pay attention to what you're doing? If you have any,
I get a lot of grief for not being on X. I'm literally still on Facebook. That's the only place I'm at.
Fair enough.
I don't do a whole lot on there because I'm so busy down here doing this stuff. I'm putting in 15-hour days. Most of the time I'm working 60 hours in 4 days, and it's crazy.
I thought this was a part-time job.
Yeah, me too. It's a lot. I get here at 7, usually leave by 10:30 ish. Wow. Sometimes I get locked in the garage at 11. I have to call security and have them open the gate. But honestly, if you want to talk to me, just send me an email. I am on Facebook. I saw my campaign page up, Kyle Harris for Idaho, I think, or something like that. But you can find me on Facebook still. If you want to send me a message on Facebook, that's great. I am starting to post more as the session progresses, and
good.
And I'm co-signing a lot more things that I'm involved in or a lot more passionate about. A lot of this first part of the session has been a lot of cleanup bills, a lot of personal bills, not a lot of crazy stuff going on. But now you're starting to see some of the big stuff come. Senator Zito is running her preemption bill and stand your ground bill. So I'm 100% on board with that. I've already co-sponsored it, and I'm looking forward to getting that one through. So there's some things coming that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to start following a little more closely and keep people up to date with.
Very good. Awesome. All right. Well, follow him on Facebook, and folks, you can always, we'll have you back, and you can follow you here too. So
absolutely. I appreciate you guys. You guys have been awesome. So
awesome. Thank you. All right, Representative Harris, we'll check in with you again. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right.